So we're going to get
Great.
started because we have a lot to cover. We had a really engaging session last time about the very definition of family, which is kind of more challenging than people might think. And so I think everybody knows me, but I'll introduce myself just in case people don't know me. I think everybody knows me here. But I'm Paul Lachelier. I'm the founder and the director of Learning Life. And this is the Family Diplomacy Initiative. This is a training, this is day 3 of a training series that we've begun this year on family diplomacy. And it's focused essentially on learning about family and learning about citizen diplomacy. And so we're in the area where we're focused on learning about family currently. And then we'll be shifting to citizen diplomacy fairly soon in August. So this time, to save time, rather than have everybody go around and introduce themselves, what I'd like each of you to do, and you'll see it in the things I posted in the Zoom chat, if you could introduce yourself by writing in the Zoom chat your name, your city, your country, and what issue, think about this, what issue most affects your family as you see it. And this can be an issue that is seemingly internal to family, like diabetes or depression, or gender inequality within the family, or it can be some sort of larger issue that more clearly kind of impacts families from outside of families, like climate change, refugee crises, unemployment, political corruption, et cetera, and so forth. So think about that. I'm particularly interested, for those of you who are looking to develop yourselves as family diplomats, for you to think more deeply about these things and to figure out really what issue you're most passionate about, because ultimately we're looking to get you to develop your knowledge of that area, that issue, and to start to develop some expertise on that issue that is really impacting your family and other families like yours. So I'm gonna stop talking. We are just, you'll notice I posted, besides that request for each of you to introduce yourselves. And by the way, Sarah, if you could just make sure that everybody does introduce themselves. And so she'll be privately messaging you if you don't introduce yourself, because we want to hear from you in the Zoom chat. But you'll see below that I posted twice. You'll have to ignore this first time I posted it because it's like mismatched. But in any case, we have Denise and Bethany, whom you guys know, who will be presenting on demographic changes happening to families across the world, and rituals, routines, and family narratives. But you're also then going to hear from, and they'll spend about 45 minutes doing that, with some opportunity for discussion. But you'll then hear from Sangeeta Madhavan, and I apologize, Sangeeta, if I'm butchering your name. But Sangeeta is at the University of Maryland, and so she will be likewise introducing herself. And Sangeeta, I don't know if you care to share your LinkedIn profile. The same goes with Denise and Bethany. If you want to share kind of some information about you in the Zoom chat, but you'll have an opportunity when you actually present to talk a little bit more about what you do, and so on. But Sangeeta right now is, I think, at least she's highlighted in green on my screen. I don't know if that's because because if I'm the person talking, it's like there's a green screen around mine, but I think yeah. So Sangeeta, you can just say hello briefly and then
Hi everyone. I'm actually right now in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it's about 6 o'clock here, but South Africa is going through a lot of load shedding, which is why I was a bit concerned about getting internet connection, but it seems to be working today. So it's lovely to meet you all, and I look forward to getting to know you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sangeeta. Okay, we're passing it on to Denise and to Bethany.
All right, it's good to see everybody and good to see returnees. So We're going to be starting with Bethany, who's going to be talking about demography.
Okay, my computer is going slow. My internet says it's unstable, which I don't know why. I'm using the same internet as Denise, but we'll see if this, let me see, I'll turn on the video and hope it helps. Okay, so of course, 1 minute. Okay, we just see the presentation.
Yep.
Okay, so once again, we are talking about families so that we can all become better diplomats, right? And so we can make change and do the important work that we want to do. And we are excited to be here to help with that. I'm going to be rushing through a little bit, Denise. If I leave stuff out that you think is critical, let me know, but I know we have double the content to cover since we all got to talk so much last time, which was fantastic. So some of this will be just spewing information. So in this part of our presentation, we are focusing on demography. And demography is simply looking at numbers and graphs to see how different aspects of our population are changing. And understanding how families are changing, understanding where they live, what they do, what they look like, helps us understand how to help families. And demographers might look at changes in the family, such as literacy, single parents, divorce, family structure. All of these things can influence the family and children and society on a larger scale, and obviously can influence policies. So we're going to look a little bit about how changing populations can influence families and how our also how that impacts our governments, our schools, and our work. Okay, we're going to throw a bunch of numbers at you. In 2020, Bahira Trask, who's a family and human development researcher who Denise has actually worked with a little bit, reported several important demographic trends in the world today. So here's some of them. So households are composed of a couple with children, or households that are composed of a couple with children account for about 38%. Households with extended families, about 26.6%. Lone partner household, 7.5, 84% of those headed by women, which then relates to poverty, stigma, discrimination in those households. And all of this is so complex in terms of how this impacts life for these families and policies for these families. Age of marriage is rising with a few exceptions. Child marriage continues. And there's 21% of girls are married before the age of 18, 5% before the age of 15. And as we talk about some of these numbers, as we talk about demography, we'll have some more data coming. The bigger picture is to keep in mind why that matters and how that applies to policies and what we want to do, what you want to do as a diplomat. So try and keep those thoughts in mind. Life expectancy at birth has increased. It was 64 years in 1990. Now it's, or at least recently, 72 years. And it's expected to continue to increase, which carries with it implications that are really important. The United Nations predicts that by 2050, 1 in 6 people in the world will be above the age of 65, which is up from 11% in 2019. So it'll become 16%. And let's see, 143 million individuals are 80 years or over, and it's expected to triple. So again, that's something to consider.
Can I say something, Bethany?
I've got so many. Yes.
When it comes to life expectancy, a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what life expectancy is. People tend to think that that's the average, that's the age that people get up to. But it's actually determined at the average age of people's death. So in the United States, for example, life expectancy was 45 years old in 1900. Today, life expectancy is like 75, 85, depending on if you're male or female. Does that mean people are living longer in terms of older? No, people still die at about the same age that they used to 100 years ago. What makes a difference is the number of children who are dying. So if you have a town where you have somebody die at 80 and somebody die at birth, life expectancy is 40 because 0 plus 80 divided by 2 is 40. And so that gives people this misunderstanding that because life expectancy is so short, people get married earlier. No, that's because they're going to die. No, if you can get past age 20 or age 30 in most places around the world, you'll probably make it to 60 or 70. Go ahead, Bethany.
Okay. It's very distracting because I can hear my computer stops and I can hear you and the other is still talking. So I'm hoping it's clear for you all hearing me talking separate from the rest of the group. Okay, so this is for chat again, because I would love to hear more, but we're trying to get through this. If you, yes, no question in the chat, do you think the world has a population problem? So share your thoughts, throw them in there. Yeah, an aging problem. It's really a big, Denise, I think you're only texting me or chatting with me. She asks, too many or too few? Y'all are out there. And my chat might be behind too, maybe. Well, the world does have a problem with overpopulation. I think overconsumption is a
I
bigger
have
issue.
just a clarification question. So what you are suggesting is that essentially, like people don't live longer on average. It's just that the chances to survive at birth are raising. Is that what you are suggesting?
That is correct. It's been estimated that we've added maybe 6 years to the length to lifespan. Lifespan has not really changed in hundreds or thousands of years, but the age at which people die has changed. We have babies who aren't dying from dysentery. We have vaccinations we can give to babies so that these children will live longer.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering that.
Yeah. Lakshmi says, and there's a relation between human longevity and genetics and lifestyle. Absolutely. In fact, in the United States, we're seeing the first time a decrease in life expectancy because people are fat. So they're spending too much time behind a computer, not enough time working. So they will die, instead of at 75, they'll die at 70. But the life expectancy might still be 75 or something.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yep.
Okay, Leroy.
Yeah, I want to ask a question. I don't know, because my network is kind of shaking, so I'm not really getting the point. So it would be necessary you write the questions in the chat for us to get it right.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, at least we will be able to attend to some of those questions.
All right. So write the questions in the chat. Thank you. Go ahead, Bethany.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep doing this. My chat's not updating.
Bell
you're
Bell
about
just
3
posted
sentences ahead of
the
me.
question, Leroy, in the chat, which is, do you think the world has a population problem?
This picture, it, by the way, is of Bethany and her husband and their 6 children.
Well, I think I need you, Denise, to, maybe I can just click the links, or maybe we need a, I'll try. I'm just so disconnected from everybody else. Okay. So yes, it has. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about some of this, and it might help and change how we think about either our answers or how we understand our answers. So looking at population, fertility, and family planning, and how this is related to family policy. So as we talk about this information, think to yourself how the number of children might affect the family, or does it affect the family? How might it affect society? If people are having more or fewer children, how might it affect the world? And another question, a deep question, is should the government play a role in the size of families? And if so, what should they do? And if not, why not? I'm enjoying reading these chats as they come through. So keep that in mind as we talk about some of these demographic changes and trends. Okay, so fertility rate. Fertility rate is talking about the actual number of births that a woman has. And so if we're talking about replacement rate, then that is a rate of 2.1 babies per couple. Everything is just so laggy. Okay, latent fertility regulation. My screen is frozen. Denise, do you want to talk about this while I try and get this to work?
You're doing fine, Bethany. I know you're. It sounds like you're struggling with the. I think it's bandwidth issues, but yeah.
For latent fertility regulations, there are things that society does that affects people's fertility. But they don't do it on purpose to affect their fertility. For example, they might say you can't get married until you're 21. If you get married at 18, you can have a lot more children than if you get married at 22, 23, 24. So a regulation making it constitutional law that you can't get married till you're at least 21 or 23 or 25 actually decreases fertility, even though the government wasn't trying to decrease fertility. So that is latent fertility regulation. We also have what's called manifest fertility regulation. And that's where we're actually trying to get people to have babies or to not have babies. So, and there have been some countries where they have tried to force people to have babies. And then there are a lot of countries, there are some countries that have tried to stop people from having babies. A lot of this depends when it comes to, do we have too much population? A lot of it depends on the carrying capacity of the country, right? It makes a difference because we have a picture here of Shakers. These Shakers, by the way, were a religious group in the United States that they came from England. They moved to New York in the late 1700s. They built 9 settlements and had over 200,000 converts by the 1800s. By 1850, they had a lot. Today, we have 4 Shakers left. Why? Because they believed in not having any babies. Okay, they believed in abstinence, absolutely no babies. So the only way that their community could continue would be to adopt people or convert people. And so that didn't work. The next slide, Bethany, can you take over? I hear my grandchildren.
Family is making itself known.
I have a question. I mean, where were these laws introduced, banning, let's say, marriage before the age of 23 or 25? Are there any countries where the marriage, like age of marriage is so raised?
I'm not muted. In China. China has
okay.
Constitutional, is in their constitution, the age that you can be married. The People's Republic of China.
Okay.
one of the things that I'm thinking about, this is also very interesting and more connected to politics and government than I'd like to imagine. But one of the things that I can say just in my lifetime is that the societal changes have decreased in terms of community. So community has changed, and people and families, I think I can say this, generally feel more isolated. And the pressure on raising a family has increased because there's less community involvement in raising children. The other issue is that, at least certainly right now, and I'm sure there's a whole list of things leading up to now in terms of population. There are issues here in the United States that are cropping their heads in terms of who gets to have kids, who doesn't get to have kids, what types of kids do they want to increase, and sort of there's a I hope an unsuccessful, at least I see an unsuccessful attempt to determine which parts of the population get to increase and which don't deserve to increase. There really is the sort of the feeling. So I can't speak about other countries, but certainly there's a lot of that going on, and right now in the United States.
Thank you, Joe. That's absolutely true. In Europe, what we're seeing is a declining fertility rate overall, which means that their total fertility rate is below that 2.1. And the reason it's 2.1 is not because people give birth to 2 children and an arm. It's because it averages out that way, that we need to replace ourselves, but children die. So we need to replace ourselves with a little bit more than 2. So that's what it comes out to. But what we have now in Europe is an aging population, which means you don't have very many younger people to help support the older people or to take over jobs or things like that, which can be very, very problematic. So if you have a whole lot of babies, that's problematic too, because it means that the older people and the middle-aged people have to pay for the government, for school and for education and health kind of things for children, to make sure that they're getting everything. Now there's, and it looks like Bethany has gotten stuck here. Oh, there she's gotten, she might get further up here. When it comes to family policies, some countries are attempting to increase fertility, like Europe, Iraq, Singapore. I had some colleagues that went over to Singapore because they're trying to figure out how to get people to have more babies. They're not replacing themselves. And if they don't replace themselves, they'll end up being like the Shakers. And it will very much impact them economically. So they do stuff like they have the love boat, where they try to, during certain times of the year, they have like free cruises to try to match people up, and they're encouraging people to have babies. But so far, nothing has worked. Russia has a huge problem this way. Italy has a huge problem. Some countries are providing childcare so that people can keep working once they have babies. Nothing is helping people to increase babies. So that's something for you all to think about. Some countries are attempting to reduce fertility. China was attempting to reduce fertility, so they ended up having their one-child policy. But they just backed off of that recently because that was problematic. They had what they called the 4-2-1 problem, which was you had 4 older adults, grandparents, you had the 2 parents, and you had 1 child. And that 1 child would then be responsible for all those adults as they aged. So that was problematic. So they have backed off a little bit, and they're allowing some people to have 2 or 3 children. And then finally, most people have few, if any, intervention policies around the world. Here in the United States, we don't have any intervention problems or any intervention policies. And we have managed to do replacement, but it's believed that a lot of that replacement relates to immigration. So that's an issue. Now we have some pictures here. Bethany, can you show them the pictures? Birth rates for countries. All right, so this just shows you some birth rates for countries. This shows birth per thousand population, and where it is like dark blue, that means they're not really at replacement level. Where it is green, they're sort of at replacement level, and then where it's red and yellow, it means that they've got too many people for their the ability to take care of those people. Here's another picture that shows essentially the same thing, although there's different ways of counting this. So this is the average number of children born to a woman during her lifetime. And then finally, I think it would be very interesting for you to see the population pyramid. Bethany, can you stop sharing, and can you put on that population pyramid site?
Yes, I think I can do that.
Now this will give you an idea. All right, so everybody can see that. And that is Italy, by the way, in the year 2020. And what you see is at the very bottom of that pyramid, it doesn't even look like a pyramid. I don't know what it looks like. Some sort of, looks like an ice cream cone with a frosty. But you will notice that they don't have very many babies. Now that's really kind of interesting because Italy is Catholic and they believe in having lots of babies, but it's not happening. And so you've got those few babies down there. I can't see the ages from here because it looks very small from where I'm sitting with my little laptop. But you see the young babies are just not very much, but you see the middle-aged people, they're kind of big, and those middle-aged people are going to grow up and be big old age people. And all those young people are going to have to then find some way to help support these older people. Does anybody want to see their country? Who would like to see their country? Anybody?
I would.
Which country?
United States.
Oh, okay. United States. There's the United States. That's in 2020. Bethany, look what it'll be like in 50 years. Okay.
This is a pretty cool instrument.
Yeah.
It is a very cool instrument, and I want everybody to have it available to them so they can look at it. Any other countries that you'd like to see?
Got a growing list of countries.
I heard blurb, blurb, blurb.
There are some suggestions in the chat, like Philippines,
Starting with
Nigeria.
Costa Rica and then Liberia.
Okay, Costa Rica and Liberia. This is a really good thing for all of us to pay attention to, because these will affect the policies of countries, or they should affect the policies of countries. All right, so there's Costa Rica in 2020. What will Costa Rica look like in 50 years from now? So they're having fewer babies. What did it look like, Bethany, 50 years before?
Wow.
Is it UNFPA data?
Yep. So what Costa Rica looked like 50 years ago, 1960, it says. So that's 60 years. They had lots of babies, and people kind of died off as those babies died off as they got older. And then notice what happened. As they have industrialized, medicines come in, and people are deciding not to have babies. Let's do one more, Bethany, was Liberia.
And what would be really helpful is at some point, I don't know if you would explain why the heck is it that people are having that families are shrinking? Why are people having fewer children?
Well, if I could answer that, that's the $64,000 question. We're trying to figure it out because, is it that they're not getting enough sex? No, they're getting enough sex, but they're just not,
I think
not
it has
having
everything
babies.
to do with community, and it's difficult. And it was less difficult when people stayed home, where you had at least one parent who stayed home and worked, and you had grandparents who were nearby who helped. You had neighbors, you had all these services that have been removed from, daycare is like impossible to get, right? In the United States, you have to have a whole other job to be able to afford for that.
Well,
So
I would also suggest that women have a choice now that they didn't have so much in the past.
absolutely.
And it is easier to not have babies.
Mm.
People think Bethany's crazy because she has 6 children.
It's hard.
She's able to do it. And we just tell people, be grateful because her children will pay for your Social Security. Gustavo.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Actually, it's two. So Denise, I don't know if I missed this in the beginning, but are we working with, when we speak about family policies and these figures that we're seeing, are we working with a definition that uses marriage as, constituting that family? And then, right, like there are some cultures that don't, where you have families, but you don't have a marriage. So I'm wondering if we're including that. And then the second question is, I wanted to push back a little bit when you noted that how come Italy, it's happening, what's happening there, when you say Italians are all about having babies and so on. Well, I would push back on that because I think cultural variance here and cultural differences and credo and all of these things, I think, suggest a lot more than these numbers can tell us, or at least are much more telling. Maybe they provide a larger picture.
And what's also interesting is that men's sperm counts seem to have gone down worldwide. Don't know why. Maybe it's plastics, who knows?
Stress.
Maybe it's stress.
There's a whole bunch of things.
Okay, I'm having a really hard time understanding because I'm using a computer with a lousy speaker. So people are kind of breaking up. Was that a comment or a question that was?
Joe, I think
given?
Joe was just saying it's there's a lot of stress in the world, which may probably or may have I should say an impact on sperm counts or fertility generally.
But you know what? I think there was stress before, but it was different types of stress. There's been wars. People have done horrible things. There's been violence throughout our history around the world.
But I think that it was clearer what a man's role was. So I think the societal changes haven't really caught up with people's mindset. So I think that the pressures that men and women feel are different, but it's still, in many countries, the man's responsibility to control things. And in fact, men are in less control of things than they ever were.
And it might be that, like Emma says, that there's a demand for better quality of life. And people are understanding different quality of life now that we've become such a global world.
COVID certainly has, people now, populations are moving. Like people are moving to their vacation spots because they know that they don't have to be in an office.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of stuff going on.
So anyways, we thought that we would introduce this to you, and just so that you can get an idea. Digital citizenship. It's hard to have babies digitally though, right, Cielo? All right, let us go, Bethany, to the next topic. I'm glad you liked that exercise. We could have spent a whole day on this, right? All right, so, excuse me. I'm fading here, but I'm gonna try. Let me just say a few words about rituals and traditions and routines, because these are really important for strengthening families and things that we should be considering. Now, when I'm going to be coughing here. How many of you eat dinner together with your families? Anybody? Anybody eat dinner together with your families? Leroy does. Bethany does. Sienna does. Yes, most days, yes. All right. How many of you have special celebrations that your family engages in, and what are those? Not enough. And what are those celebrations? Bethany just had a celebration last night. It was her 40th birthday. She's now saying, thank you, Mom. Ice cream and cake for her birthday. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, graduations, personal achievements. All right, these things, very good. These things are rituals and routines. Now, traditions usually refer to things handed down from one generation from the past into the current generation. Our family handed down routines to us, and our families also handed down rituals to us, but we also made our own routines, and we also have sometimes developed our own rituals, and a lot of our rituals are culturally determined. But these things are very important, we have found. Families who have routines tend to be healthier physically, healthier emotionally, and routines are things that we repeat in everyday life. For example, you go to bed at a certain time, you wake up at a certain time, you go to work, that kind of thing. Unlike routines, though, rituals involve a lot of emotion. So think about weddings. There's a lot of emotion in weddings. Funerals, a lot of emotion in funerals. Children leaving home to go to school. Births, I cry when I see births. Bar mitzvahs, celebration of important holidays. There's not a whole lot of emotion in vacuuming the floor on Saturdays. There's not a whole lot of emotion when you kiss a spouse when they come home, if that's a way of greeting. So there's a difference between routines and rituals. Rituals also involve symbols and even sacred meaning. Some traditions have many symbols. For example, weddings. All right, so our next slide here is weddings. There's my daughter at her wedding. Oh, that picture, by the way, that Bethany just passed over very quickly, is a ritual among the Apache young women. When they have their first period, the family calls up everybody in the community and says, hey, Nelda just had her period, so we're all going to celebrate this and come down, and she's going to become a woman. And then she spends hours preparing for it. She is covered with corn flour, which is very sacred. There's a lot of dancing and chanting and all sorts of things that go on. And at the end, she is considered a woman, and she's recognized as a woman. Now, if you look at the symbolism in weddings, I have for most weddings around the world, they tend to be public. there tend to be celebrations. There's a lot of superstitions that are involved. In the United States, we say something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. And I think that's because as adults, we recognize that life does not always go the way we want it. So we try to find some ways to help bring a couple good luck. There are important colors. In old China, red was the color of weddings. White is the color in the United States. Weddings also are very symbolic of changing membership. So for example, in some cultures, the father will hand the bride over to the male. There are also symbols related to fertility. In Western cultures, rice would be thrown. People have forgotten what that means. The reason rice would be thrown is because every piece of rice that would land in your hair was symbolic of how many babies you would have. So probably a lot of people were going, and then that was a joke. And then finally, it's preparation for life, both material and non-material. So there are a lot of symbols in that wedding ceremony. Next, rituals take things from the ordinary to the extraordinary, whether it's washing of feet, bowing in certain ways. So there are special preparations that are made, such as getting dressed up, having special meals, special foods. These things are really important. Routines are also important. Learning how to use knives and forks to eat, if you use knives and forks to eat, chopsticks in our family, whatever, those things are important. Some rituals are barely rituals. For example, getting out good plates when visitors come. And then you have preparations. Rituals involve advanced preparations. It doesn't take a whole lot of preparation to brush your teeth, but it does take a lot of preparation to prepare, in the United States, a Thanksgiving meal. So the ritual is not just the ceremony itself, the actual performance, but it is the whole process of preparing it, experiencing it, and then there's usually a reintegration back to life. So if we get back to marriage, you prepare for the wedding, you get married, and then there's something that happens afterwards that gets everybody back to life. For example, in the United States, we have a reception. Here is a picture of Thanksgiving meal, which is most places around the world have some type of Thanksgiving celebration of some sort. I know my foster son from China, it is huge to have Chinese New Year. And the food that is prepared and the things that are done and red pocket money, all sorts of stuff is part of that ritual. And it's all part of bringing families together. All right, we have to stop here. I'm only about halfway through, but I promised that I would give the time to our next guest.
And Sangeeta informed me that so South Africa, I gather, is restricting access to electricity, and so she may have to. So you may have more time, Denise and Bethany, to talk towards the tail end of this, and of course we can have more time for conversation. But Sangeeta is basically going to have to leave in about 15 minutes because her internet is going to conk out because South Africa's restricting internet, if I understand correctly.
Okay, then we'll turn the time over to her so she can at least get started. Hopefully you guys have found something useful in what we've talked about, and we can pick up more. Also, we're kind of in between stuff right now. We're not even at home, but next week we can, things will be better. We have to actually go catch a plane. So we'll be turning the facilitation over to you, Paul.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
I forgot about that. Yes. So
yes.
Bethany and Denise, thank you so much for for what you've been able to cover today. And see you next Sunday.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Sangeeta.
Hi. Yeah, sorry about this, but South Africa is in the middle of a bit of an energy crisis, so it's been a bit tricky here.
And Sangeeta, before you go on, let me actually quickly take a photo of everybody. I take a photo at every, and I sometimes forget. So if everybody could turn on your videos briefly, Justice in Nigeria, Jules in Burundi. Let me quickly take this. And what I'll do is I'll say 1, 2, 3, smile. And if you can smile on 3. So 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect. I think I got everybody here. Fantastic. All right, guys. Sangeeta, go ahead.
Okay, so hi, everyone. Just to give you a bit of background, I'm a demographer in sociology based at the University of Maryland, and I actually do all my research in sub-Saharan Africa. And what I wanted to share with you are some from my ongoing project in Nairobi, Kenya, which is really focused on kinship and marriage and child well-being in low-income communities in Nairobi. So, Paul, can I share?
Yes, you should be able to share.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Can everybody see this? Yes. Okay. I'm just going to quickly go through this. These are not that important. I'm more concerned about listening to all of you. Shoot. Okay. Let me just. I can just get that. No. Okay. So one of the things that I think Bethany was talking about was the whole issue of households. And I think so all my research actually focuses on the people who don't live with you, but who are still very, very much part of your world of social connections, and whether they are biologically linked or not. And some of that happens through marriage and some of it does not. And so just to give you, I think all of you are very, very familiar with this, but this is just an idea when I talk about kinship, what am I talking about? So if you think about it from the perspective of the child, which is sort of right here, I mean, I think all of you understand the generations, and both on the mother's and father's side. Now, these are all biological kin. Obviously, there are other people who are very important in our lives who we may well consider to be family, who are not on here. But in the research that we do, we're right now in Kenya in particular, we're actually trying to get a better understanding of what does kinship mean in urban Kenya and low-income Kenya in this particular historical moment when unemployment is very, very high. People are moving, livelihood is actually quite precarious, and we're trying to actually understand whether kinship is still kind of plays the safety net that it has, and if so, what has changed and what is it that needs to be done to actually improve the lives of people in these communities. So I studied this, and I've been thinking about kinship for a long, long time, but I think it's a really important form of social structure and organization globally in all the countries that are represented on this call. I think it allows us to think about these things like the roles of men and women, generational linkages, the old and the young. There was talk about aging, childbearing, parenting, marriage, and ultimately well-being. I mean, if we think about, this, often used thing about it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I guess we're sort of asking, does it? And if so, what part of that village is actually important? Because I just don't think we know. And I think for me, particularly in demography, we've been very hung up on the concept of household. And I don't think it's the same thing as family. And we miss out on a whole lot of very, very important links that extend well beyond our immediate households. And particularly in the context of migration, which I'm sure many of your families are intimately familiar with. And also that, structure and support are not the same thing. You may have a family with, a large family, but it doesn't mean that necessarily means that you're going to be getting a lot more support. That, of course, depends on many other things. And then lastly, that I said kinship is something that's not just biological, but it can be something that is constructed. And I think it's changing in many ways. And this is just a very simplified version, and I'd love to hear what others have to say. I think economically, politically, the ability of people to actually support one another may be weakening because of unemployment, climate change that's driving people away, shifting means of livelihood, land loss, and also policies, neoliberal policies that have really weakened government support for families. I think there's some cultural debates about whether there is any kind of move towards nuclear family arrangements. I think the jury is still out. There are all sorts of different arrangements that are happening, and this differs across class. And then I think others have already said this, fertility decline, move to a smaller family size, women's involvement in the labor force certainly affects what they can and want to be doing. People are living longer for sure, but perhaps with more illness, which means caregiving responsibilities are shifting. And then let's not forget technology. I think cell phones and social media, and there's a question of whether that's necessarily strengthening links or perhaps even weakening them. And I think, again, we don't quite know the answer yet. So I just wanted to quickly take you through some of the work we're doing. This is a National Institutes of Health project in Nairobi, Kenya, and we're following about 1,250 young women and young children over 6 waves of data collection to really understand how kinship support changes over time and what are the contributions of mothers, fathers, and extended kin to children's well-being, right? So that's kind of the basic outline. And I'm not going to go through this in the interest of time, but just to give you an idea of the communities in which we're working in, these are low-income settlements, very densely populated, lots of migrants, high unemployment, poor housing. These are just some visuals of what I'm talking about. Kenya, by the way, is actually a country that also has, increasingly very steep sort of gradations of inequality. So you've got lots of small groups of very, very, concentrated wealth, and then a vast majority of desperately poor, like in some of the communities that we work in. And so what I just wanted to share with you, just from our initial findings, and this is really just to give you an idea of sort of when we think about kin, just to give you an idea, these darker shades are sort of where kin are located, right? So this is more of we're doing some geospatial mapping of where people are in terms of distance, and does distance matter to the ways in which people help you? This is a country in which you've got mobile banking, so you can shift money around from all over Kenya, and even beyond. But just as this red square is sort of where we're doing our work, and you can see sort of pockets of these very right around it where there's high density, and there's a little bit on the western part of Kenya. And then this Kenya is also very, very ethnically, ethnic identity is very important. So, and a lot of the spatial where people live is actually linked to ethnicity. So this reflects some of that distribution as well. But I think what is perhaps something that is surprising to a lot of people, and this is just very, very early data, is really that kinship support is not very much. And so far, what we're finding here, we're measuring both support for childcare and for financial support. And the average number of kin is really, just around the 2 mark, right? And if you think about it as proportions, it's not even 20%. And for monetary, it's even less than 15%. So think about like all the people, your brothers, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, etc. That's kind of your denominator. And the number of people who are actually providing this support is actually quite small. And this is not to say anything about that people don't want to, it's that people cannot because of their own economic hardships that they're facing, that this idea of supporting one another is actually very difficult, certainly in these communities. And what's interesting here is we always think about sort of people who move to the big cities or the ones who are supporting ones in the rural areas. In this context, it's actually somewhat different. People in rural communities are actually providing a lot of support to those in these urban communities who are out there, but have really very, very precarious livelihood, a lot of food insecurity, very, very inadequate access to healthcare. And so this kinship support is fragile, but even this tiny amount is desperately needed to actually make ends meet. So I'm just going to actually leave it at that because I think I certainly have a lot of questions that I'd love to hear from you all about. And this is, who is considered a kin and why? What are the expectations of kin in your communities? When are they most needed? How important is reciprocity? I told you about geography, technology, and also sort of is there a role for governments and policy to actually support kin-based safety nets? I mean, this is something that some of it's been discussed in the US and in some other cases, including Kenya, where there's now a whole policy on kind of, I think it's called the economy of care, about trying to actually think about unpaid labor and how we actually support at both ends of the life course, so both the young as well as the old, and realizing that people are struggling, and the family that, the great African family thing is not, it's just not robust enough. And it's, again, because people are very, very much struggling. And I imagine that these economic imperatives is certainly not unique to Kenya nor to Africa, and I imagine it's all over the world. And I definitely know it's, front and center in the United States. So that's where I'd like to just leave it at, and really just to hear from you all. But thank you.
Great, Sangeeta. This is really helpful. Can you put those questions in the chat? Just cut and paste them and put them in the chat, and that will be helpful.
Yep.
So Sangeeta is opening up the conversation, but just to be clear, and it sounds like to some extent you're asking us this question, who's considered kin, but if I'm understanding you correctly, and I could be wrong here, you're understanding kin as people you don't live with, but that are nonetheless blood ties?
Oh yeah, no, it's everybody. I think we are actually, in our study, it's who you live with and who you don't. But I think, the idea of kin is something that we've known this in sociology for years. It is something that you do construct. On one hand, you've got these biological links, which we focus on, but we also very much care about the other people, including the neighbors and the coworkers and your, whatever, anybody, and who are actually there to provide you with that. So this is why I think, as far as I'm concerned, the social construction of kin is something that most communities do and have very different rules about what to expect from whom. So
to kind of preface our conversation here, and it's nice to see that already there are 3 hands raised, but it connects well to what we previously talked about, because last week we talked about the definition of family, and very quickly it became clear that for a number of people participating in these trainings, family is in fact a fairly fluid concept. It's not necessarily just people you have blood ties to or you married, connected to. It can include friends and others and so on. And it does seem to, I think the central problem seems to be about care, and especially given what we just learned about the increasing age of population. So not only do we have young children that need intensive care and more education and so on, and more investment therefore per child, but also we have growing numbers of people who are getting older and older and need even more care. So care is becoming a kind of crisis, as some people have talked about. And then so it relates to kinship, right? Like, if you have a relatively small family with a lot of needs, maybe we need to have a more expansive concept of care and kinship. So I want to start the conversation.
I think that's a really nice way of, that's a nice way of putting it. I mean, if ultimately we care about, what are the care? I mean, if a family is a space in which we nurture and provide care, but that is now being, that is a very difficult thing to do in many contexts in which jobs are not there, livelihoods are seriously at risk, and people are moving, and they're dispersed, all sorts of things. But that's basically it. So
let's start with Joe Tolles, and then Belle, and then Alex. And please do raise your hand with the electronic hand if you want to contribute.
Hi, so I just really wanted to know if you have data over the years. Has the definition or the application of kin changed in the way that I think that it's changed here? So my argument is that kinship was sort of a natural part of society, accepted, and almost it was a responsibility. And that we have moved far away from that now and really isolated ourselves and can't be bothered with, or maybe because of survival issues, our own survival issues. So I'm curious if that's the same.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing just in the Kenya case, as I said, that we're just in, wave 1 of data collection, and part of this is to actually see, because when you ask someone, do you think this has changed? Almost everybody will tell you, yes, it has. We don't care about our family anymore, blah, blah, blah. But the question is, I think I'd actually like to know, how does that actually look like in data, right? And we don't have a whole lot of data on this. So my answer to the Kenya case is, I can get back to in a few years and let you know exactly how that's been changing. But I should say that For the US case, oh God, what's his name? There have been several books saying that, no, it's not that sort of, kinship is gone or whatever. It's changing. I mean, it's changing in its form and its function, but people are still connected. And now some would say even more so because of technology. And that, this is just giving us a different way of connecting. And whether that's necessarily good or bad, I'm certainly not the one to judge. But I think those are all really important questions. But I think most of the literature that I'm familiar with is suggesting, yeah, it's fundamentally shifting in all over the world, not just in the US, but I think probably every single place I know of. And I think now the question is sort of in this era of very, very rapid change, along with all these sort of economic exigencies that are also there, what does this mean in terms of the well-being of families? And in my case, my interest being children in particular.
Yeah, my perception might be skewed because I'm surrounded by kids who are. I've adopted eight kids from the foster care system, and so I help people. I help try to connect. So I see a lot of that, and the lack of family support, which for most cases brings the kids into care.
Mm-hmm. This is great. By the way, I love the fact that a lot of you are contributing to the conversation on Zoom. So we've got, just before we hear from Belle, Aaron from Ghana is talking about kinship in Ghana and the way it's blood related, but it seems, their concept of blood, it seems, is much broader. So you have, potentially much broader kinship communities that you can tap into for the care that's needed. And Esma mentioned technology probably widened our nets, but made the connection shallower, which is a well-stated kind of summary of what I think some people are finding about this. Belle? Belle, and by the way, so Joe is joining us, just so you guys can tell us where you're coming from. Joe is joining us from, I think you're still in Alabama, not New York. You haven't moved yet, right?
Alabama still,
okay.
Yes.
So Joe is in Alabama, the United States. Belle is joining us from, I think, was it Montenegro? I can't remember.
Close enough. From North Macedonia.
Right, in Europe, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think what Aaron points out is it's very important. And I was going to say that in my work, kinship, it's also, besides what we mentioned, marital status or parent status, siblings, and so on, it's also about geography, right? Sharing geographic proximity, perhaps, but also like networks and like ethnic and cultural background that also constitutes kinship. So it is also very fluid in that sense. And I'm sorry, how do I say your name? Sangeeta? Is it Sangeeta?
Sorry, yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Sangeeta. Sangeeta, I was wondering if support is a defining factor in this, within your presentation or within kinship overall, and if maybe you could expand perhaps a bit on the role of support in kinship. And so my question is really, why are we talking about support? Why are we covering support when we're speaking about kinship? Is it that important? Like, can you tell us more about that?
Well, certainly in the Kenyan context, that is precisely what people think about kinship, is that it is a form of support. And so when we think about kinship, I mean, you can certainly draw, everybody knows sort of your map of your family tree, whatever. And I think about it as sort of, the universe of available kin. But then I mean, these are the questions we want to ask. I mean, what is it that when we think, this is the thing about family. I mean, if kin, and I would imagine for most of us, the people who don't live with us or may not even be biologically linked to us are certainly, we consider family for all sorts of reasons. And we come to depend on them for certain things, and they come to depend on us for other things. And so, yeah, I think support is a very, very critical part of how we think about who is. In fact, I would say in some cases, it's exactly the support that almost determines how you think about a family member, whether you see them as close or not. So it's a bit of a, which is causing which is a bit difficult to disentangle. So yes, I definitely think that support is a critical factor in thinking about kinship.
Alex, who is joining us from the East Coast of the United States, the Washington, D.C. area.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Sangeeta, for your presentation. It was really informative and it was really, really interesting. And I think something that stuck out to me as a parallel in my life to kinship relates to the idea of the diaspora community, particularly in the United States. I'm from Pittsburgh, which is in the United States, but it's not a particularly diverse city, I'd say, in the United States. But my family found a lot of connection through the Filipino community that was there. And so within the Filipino community, and I think a lot in similar cultures where everyone calls each other regardless of blood ties, tita and tito, which is like aunt, uncle, you'd call older members within your generation, like big sister, big brother. And so I think that has a lot of connecting with people who have a lot like of similarities in background. And I've had a lot of family friends within this community, and there have been many times where either a member of the community is struggling or even my own family has been struggling, and the community really comes together to help take care of different individuals. And it's really seen as like family friends, but it's been hard to figure out terms to describe this to friends who are really, to my other friends in different circles who are outside of this community, and they don't seem to understand how someone who has no blood ties to me can be considered someone so close that I would call them an aunt or an uncle. And so I thought it was really interesting as we were all talking about this, that it wasn't something that was blood tied, not even necessarily geographic in the sense of proximity. We were all spread throughout the city, but if someone needed our help, we would drive like an hour across to come. And I think a lot has to do with ethnic ties and diaspora communities, because all of us had come from so far away, and it's something that still binds us together, which I thought was really nice.
Yep.
Gustavo, who is originally from Costa Rica, but joining us from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, Paul. Yes, I was thinking about the question about who is considered kin, and I am new to the concept, but it feels like we are all someone's kin, and in the same way we all have a kin in our lives, right? Like everyone inside our support system will be by definition considered kin, right? And it is really interesting because I work with young adults and most of the migrants here in the United States, and it is really important because when you ask that when are kin most needed, I think that for them it's like the kin figure becomes like twice as relevant, because on one hand they are like young people, right? And it seems to be that this is a really relevant time of our lives when we really look out for support. And in the second, and in the other part, like they are migrants, right? So the kin seems to be a really important part in their development. And yeah, I just want to say that that's how I understood the idea, and thank you, because I think that it's relevant for what I do.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gustavo. Leroy, who is joining us from, I can't remember, Leroy, if you're in I think you're in Liberia or Nigeria.
Liberia.
Okay, go ahead, Leroy.
All right, for my setting here, kinship refers to a person who is directly from the same place you're from. Maybe if you're from the sub-political division of Liberia, and that other person who is with you presently is from there, it automatically become your kinsman, or you both become kings to each other. But for the definition of kings, it has to do with blood sharing. But the understanding or the perception of people is what actually can make a word to be used wrongly. So that's the understanding of kinship in Liberia here. And when it comes to the expectation of a king should be someone who is there for you, to provide for you, or to stand by you in times of difficulty or in times of enjoyment and whatever. A person who will be there to provide you everything, or will be there to share your happiness, is what is expected in kinship, or these are things that are expected in kinship. And when we also talk about when a king most needed, kings are most needed in times of difficulty, because you need somebody to console you, you need somebody to talk to you, you need somebody to give you instruction and stuff like that. So at this point in time, a king is needed for consolation or whatever you will do for your heart to be at peace. So these are times that you can find, or you can be in need of kings. And we also have the importance of I think I'll stop here for time's sake.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leroy. We are switching to Tennille, who is joining us from Germany, but is from Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much, Sanjita, for that presentation. To answer your question, I grew to understand that because family is fluid and kinship is almost like a subset or it's built upon family. If family is fluid, then I'm beginning to think that kinship would at some way be fluid as well too. So in that being, then it wouldn't be bound, or it couldn't or shouldn't be bound to geography. When it's needed, it serves the same purpose as a family would serve, where it's like emotional need, psychological need. So it serves that purpose. And reason I think too also is because of migration, technological advancement. You can't be bound to geography anymore. Like, okay, you're my family. And because you're my family, I would have you as a kinship, because we all have some family members who do not serve the purpose as a family is supposed to. They're there, but they're not there. So yeah, I think that governments should at least do some support when it comes to kinship. But I think when it comes to government role, the more access we give them to decisions when it comes to family, fertility, and these things, it's almost as if they have an influence and control over it. So as much as we want them in, it's like we have to come combined to let them know how much they should get access to, how much influence they should have on decisions that families and kinship make, because it will blow it out of control. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to say your point about fluidity, I'm completely in agreement with. You're absolutely right. Geography, time, people's circumstances. I mean, a brother who may have supported you last year and then loses his job cannot support you this year. So these are all, I mean, I think fluidity is absolutely the correct word. Yeah, I agree.
You know, I just before we go on to Justice, who's joining us from Nigeria, it seems what's interesting to me is, on the one hand, like, you know, for anybody who's kind of familiar with socialism, there are some versions of socialism where the family becomes essentially, or family caretaking is a public affair, and at perhaps the one extreme of this, when you might say, is you have basically where the government takes over, kind of taking care of the family, and at the other extreme is you know, where it's just a nuclear family that's taking care of themselves, and there's no kind of support from the wider world. But it seems like in these conditions of fluidity, in various ways, it would seem that allowing families to define themselves, and to say who is a meaningful part of this family, but at the same time, a government, ideally, of course, a government that actually provides the support that's needed for these organic families, right? These families that self-define themselves as families, would be kind of some sort of a go-between between this kind of like strictly government caretaker family versus the nuclear family. So I just want to throw that out there, because I'm finding this conversation really stimulating, and I'm just trying to think about how government, because that's part of your question. I think one of the questions that you raised is, you know, where does government fit into this, and in what ways in which governments can support.
I want to let other people talk, but this sort of, I think, sorry, the last speaker, is it, I'm blind as a bat. It's Tennille, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think we do something about, I don't think we want to get to the place of sort of family surveillance stuff, because we've had enough of that in many places and it has had disastrous. And in fact, Joe, who's familiar with the foster care system, probably knows this better than anyone. And so I don't think that's certainly that's not in my head. I'm thinking about ways in which, whatever it is, the arrangement, what do we want to support? Well, we want to support the healthy development of children. We want to make sure that, education, food, all those things are given. Opportunities are there. And I guess the issue is, maybe that's the question. What is government's role in supporting that? And whatever it is, the family form that makes that happen, so be it. And I think, to me, that's the way I approach it. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Justice from Nigeria, from Port Harcourt, Nigeria.
Okay, let me make my contribution briefly. One of the uniqueness of Nigeria, which happens to be the giant of Africa, is the multiple ethnicity and the diverse cultures. And these cultures and ethnicity affects kinship in one way or the other. I think let me cite a scenario directly to my hometown. When we talk about kinship, we're talking about people who are closely related to you by blood. Anything outside blood, anything exception of blood isn't kinship. Now, to some extent, a man might decide to settle in a place for a long time, maybe 5, 10, 15 years, and by virtue of things, he likes how a particular family operates. He can decide to join that particular family. And once the man joins that particular family, he becomes a kingsman in that family. His family becomes part of that larger family, in as much as he has attained or meet up the requirement. Because my people takes, despite the level of civilization and the high.
I'm going to ask, when he comes back from freezing, I'm going to ask him to turn off his video so that we can hear him. Hopefully come back in about. Yep. Justice, can you turn off your video while you're talking so that we can hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So now, trying to join the kinsman, there are certain rites, certain rituals that must be done. And when those rituals are being met, you can be part of that kingship. You have to be part of that family. Now, an exception of that, whether you've stayed in a place for 100 years or you buy the land in a particular region, doesn't make you part of that family. Doesn't make you a king in that family. Doesn't make you a kinsman in that family. But for you to be part of a kinsman in a particular area, in my own region, in my own area, you must have to meet up to the rites, the rituals of the family. The customs must be observed. There are things you must have to do before you can be part of those kinsmen. So Nigeria as a country, the government finds it difficult. Region operate as per kinship.
Justice, I think for the sake of brevity here, and because we're approaching 1:30, and I'm thrilled if Sangeeta is still with us. I'm thrilled to see that I think you're still with us. But if you could,
sorry, I am on. I'm turning off my video, but I'm here.
Great. So Justice, if you could write the rest of your comment in the chat, that would be really helpful, because we'd love to actually record what you're saying in one way or another, whether it's spoken or not. But the fact that your connection's not great it would be great for you to add something to the Zoom chat. And by the way, so one of our interns, her family comes from Nigeria. Miriam, I don't know if you want to contribute to that conversation about Nigeria and do so in the chat, or if we have time, do so by voice. But we've got Esma next, who is joining us from, I can't remember where. Esma?
I'm from Georgia, the country. Anyway, I just want to say that we have a conflict-affected territory, and we have a huge IDP community that had to flee the territory due to separatism and then Russian occupation later on. And these people, they are really supporting each other, even if and even when they're not like biologically related, but you know, just belong and being from that region, if you are, and you know, having gone through that experience of fleeing, they really try to support each other. So there is a sense of kinship, sort of. Yeah.
Great. Mulba, who is joining us from Liberia.
Okay, let me say good afternoon from Liberia. So again, I am Moba Isaac Flomo, and I really just want to contribute with regards to what we are discussing, the topic on a discussion, kingship. And firstly, I will want to look at the definition of kingship. So in our own lay corner, we look at kingship to mean a kind of close connection marked by community of interest or similarity in nature or character. And so now bringing it down to what Liberians will look at kingship to look like, I mean, we want to reference a kind of group, like two different groups in our own culture. We call the poorer and Sunday societies. So they are actually people who believe in the informal sector of our educational system. And so they train their children into like certain tribes, like where you hunt animals, but you don't have to go and take like guns to shoot them. You set a trap and then you give it time to be a kind of set where, you know, animals come and fall into it. So they have different things that, you know, they are training those children into. So from our own understanding of what we think kingship is, people look at the definition of kingship in that way. If we are all believing in this particular aspect of society, that is our culture, we consider each other as kings. So I just wanted this to be made clear. But then there is a kind of serious problem with why is it that we find it even difficult to maintain kingship, especially in Liberia. We're looking at other issues that influence this, like disasters, right? Talk about natural disasters. There are instances where there are people in this house, and there's a point in time that the house catch on fire, and people from that particular area are affected. Sometimes the children who are rescued from there become orphans automatically. So even the government is not having that level of support to render to those children, and at the end, some of them become or kind of less fortunate or underprivileged, and we even call or kind of special name we give to them. We call them Zogos. So Zogo in our own way would mean people who are either abusers of opportunities. So either that you had this opportunity and you misuse the opportunity. So we decided to call you Zogo. So, but there's also a kind of thing that almost everybody will complain about, which is poverty. But I think one of the major challenges with kinship in Liberia is legislations. And I think it's something we really need to pay attention to as a government, as a country, if really people should live up to a kind of better standard as compared to what we think humans should look like. Because there are people who are even giving birth to children who don't understand what it means to take care of the children, who don't understand what it means to give them certain level of education. And at the end, they become less fortunate. They become risky people to society. And we are even very mindful of most of these children. For some of us, we're just fortunate, like I've explained almost every time in my own story. Some of us were fortunate to go around people who are that educated, who have that kind of value for people, who have that kind of respect. And so they were able to bring us up certain ways. But if it wouldn't have been this, some of us would have been very bad people in society now. And I think I would not even have had this opportunity. So I think the major challenge is legislations, and this is actually should be national. The national government of every country should be able to legislate something that will coordinate the issue of kinship, that people will be able to understand even when it comes to human rights violations. How can I be able to live with all of people that at the end it wouldn't lead me to something else? And as a result, now some of us are being hugely abused with war. I mean, we had 14 years of civil unrest in Liberia because people didn't have the concept of what kinship is, what kinship should be. And I think this is something we need to start speaking about. From our end, I think that is my little contribution. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to all of you.
Great. Thanks, Mulba. I'm going to let Sangeeta respond to all of your comments if she has any kind of concluding comments, and then I'll wrap things up because we're now at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Sangeeta?
Yeah, no, I don't want to keep anybody, but and there's a lot to absorb here, but I do feel like, I mean, I've really appreciated hearing these very sort of really well thought out and complicated ideas, and I think this is exactly what it is. I mean, I think kinship is the definitions vary enormously. They depend on context. They change over time, the role of government, and I don't really have any sort of grand statement to make, but just to say that I'm also learning about this, and I really appreciate the input from everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, great. This is I'm continually amazed by the richness of these conversations, but today was a particularly good one, as we heard from a lot of you from quite different perspectives in different parts of the world, not only through those of you who were able to speak, but also in the Zoom chat. I do encourage you to keep coming to these meetings. We are in fact tracking attendance, and we are in fact tracking participation for those who want a certificate for this training at the end of it. The last day of the phase 1, I'll just remind you of part 1 of this training, is August 21st. So keep participating until then. And thanks, by the way, to Sarah and to Jenna Lind, who are helping with the tracking of attendance and the tracking of participation in these meetings. You'll also have, for those of you who are not able to make every meeting, we are video recording the meetings. The meetings will be and continually posted to our Facebook group. And if you didn't get a chance to make a comment, there's something that you found really interesting, you're welcome to actually post a comment in the Facebook when we actually share the video of the recording of the meeting, and use that space to share questions, share comments, etc., and so forth. So I think that's it for now. Oh, I should mention what's coming next. So Sangeeta, if all goes well, will be joining us again next week, as well as Denise and Bethany, and they will be talking about globalization, the ways in which globalization is impacting families, as well as migration. So Sangeeta will be talking more about migration, and Denise and Bethany will be talking more about globalization and its impact on families. So I hope you guys have found this really interesting, and look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Bye, everybody.